Hey, and welcome on in. It's me, Crazy Gaming Days, and today I would like to give you guys a video that's pretty much dedicated to YouTube and YouTube alone. I decided I wanted to do a Resident Evil game tier list from beginning to most recent, and besides that, I wanted it to include the spin-offs, and I wanted to just rate the games or do it in a tier list and show you guys what I feel is the best and what I feel is the worst. So let's jump on into that. So first things first, let's start from the beginning. We have to start from the beginning, correct? That's just how it is. So let's go with Resident Evil 1. Now, Resident Evil 1 is still a game that I consider to be phenomenal. Like, I can still play this game over and over. The dialogue is hilarious. The cutscenes are great. Everything about it is, I don't know, it just has that, I guess it could be nostalgia, but it just has that amazing feel that I usually look for in Resident Evil. Resident Evil 1, the original, has all of that. The best lines, you'll laugh, you'll enjoy it. It's just great. It is definitely so great. And that instantly goes up to an S rank. Now, you can probably see some games where you're like, whoa, did he just put that at the bottom? Or, whoa, does he really think that game is good? You might see that here, but I mean, to each their own. And this is my list. You can do your own list and see what you come up with. Now we move on, of course, right? We got to move on to Resident Evil 2 Original. I remember the first time I laid eyes on this game. My cousin actually had a copy of the trial edition, and during one of our family get-togethers or parties or whatever you want to call it, he booted it up and let me have a chance to play it, and I was amazed. I'm like, whoa, this is like Resident Evil 1, but it just took it up a notch. It really took it up a notch. From that, I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And still to this day, Resident Evil 2 is part of like 3 of my all-time favorites. So Resident Evil 2 Original has to go into the S+, which I have to change this to real quick. There we go, S+. I moved Resident Evil 1 to S. It didn't have the tiers, like the extra tiers. I added it, S+, and F, and we can go from here. Ooh, okay, here we go. Now is when things are cooking. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, a game many, and I mean so many, people feel is the best Resident Evil game still to this day, but in my opinion, it fell short. Yes, it was great seeing Jill Valentine once again, you know, being the main character. I like that part. Having a side character like Carlos gave off, I don't know, he's kind of flirty, kind of silly. It worked for the most part, and the best part of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is Nemesis. Nemesis was the scariest and craziest part about that game. It's really the only reason I still play the game. The main reason I still play Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is for Nemesis alone. Besides that, the game, again, is alright. It's not on the level of Resident Evil 2, and I still enjoy Resident Evil 1 more if I was going to play one of the classics. So, we're going to take Resident Evil 3, and I will put that into the A tier. That's just where I feel it is. I feel it's not an S rank game, and it's definitely not an S+. Now we take a step away from the main games themselves. This game is still considered canon because of its story, or a certain part of its story in which you're just like, oh, sure, whatever. But Resident Evil Survivor is actually, from what I remember, the first real spin-off of the Resident Evil series, featuring a character named Ark Thompson, or Ark Bozo, depends on how you want to see him. This dude is a work of art. We'll just say Ark Thompson and the game itself is a work of art. It's even more cheesier than Resident Evil 1 Original. but not in a great way. It feels like they tried too hard to kind of make it silly, or if that wasn't their intention, yikes. Not sure what they were going with that. But here's the thing. Survivor has some weird charm to it. If you've ever played it outside of the United States, you probably remember it as a light gun or a gun con game. You were able to pick it up on PlayStation, I believe in Japan, and in Europe, and you were allowed to use the gun for the PlayStation. It actually worked. In America, that was not a thing. I believe support was removed, and yeah, so we had to play with a controller, which kind of didn't give it the right feel to me at first. But as I got older and I actually played it again, I feel Resident Evil Survivor did a great job. It actually did a great job as being just a random spin-off for shits and giggles, something you can just play if you want to try to have a little bit of fun and enjoy the silly story that it has. But with that said, it does have its flaws. Without the gun con support, it's not as fun. And yeah, it was just one of many Survivor games. So I will add Resident Evil Survivor under the B tier. So far, we're in a row. We've got our S+, we got an S, an A, and a B. Moving on forward once again, we are on to Resident Evil Code Veronica, or if you've played the PlayStation version and not the Dreamcast version, Resident Evil Code Veronica X. Now this is a game that brings back not only Claire, but Chris Redfield. They both make their return in this game. You get a side character, Steve Burnside, some weird name. Rip off Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know what it is, but this game is definitely still one of my favorites. While I can't play it as much as I used to, I once upon a time played this game over 50 times in one summer. Yes, you could say that I know life the game, just to try to learn it as best as I could. Funny enough, as I got older, I didn't remember a damn thing, so it's kind of pointless. But Resident Evil Code Veronica was a gem. I still remember my brother picking it up one random day. He picked up a Dreamcast, he picked up Code Veronica. I saw him playing it. He was terrible at the game. When he was gone, I turned it on, played Code Veronica. Great game, but a very difficult one. I actually still consider Code Veronica to be one of the more hard Resident Evil games, along with another one you will see later on that I actually don't like so much. With that, we will be putting Code Veronica in the S+ tier. Code Veronica, my second favorite Resident Evil game. If you've never played Code Veronica, find Code Veronica X, give it a shot. Don't let the confusing routes throw you off, or sometimes there's a lack of enemies. Don't let that throw you off. Give it a chance. Try to make it all the way through. But remember, this is true survival horror. Save your ammo, or you'll regret it. Following Resident Evil Code Veronica is Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. Now you're going to wonder, wait, if Resident Evil Survivor didn't do so well, why did they make a Survivor 2? Good question. I have no idea. For a long time, I didn't know this game existed. But when I did catch wind of its release, I saw that there were arcade cabinets not in the States. So I never got to play it in the arcade. And of course, it is a arcade shooter. I believe it had a gun attached, 2 pedals, and a way to move left to right. There was full control over the characters. You were playing Claire Redfield or Steve Burnside, and pretty much you go through chapters or stages. I forgot how many stages there is, but it's from the beginning of the game pretty much up until, I believe, the game ends on Plane Tyrant. So the Tyrant plane fight, I believe that's where the game ends, if I remember correct. But it's not good. This one, unlike Survivor 1, this one doesn't really have much to it. I believe it's supposed to be like a dream sequence when Claire's passed out. I don't know how that would make sense anyways, but whatever, we're just gonna go with that idea. And in this game, you actually encounter Nemesis. And this is when things kind of took a weird turn, because why would Claire dream of Nemesis, though she doesn't even know of Nemesis, or she's never encountered him? So that kind of throws me off, or actually I believe it throws a lot of people off. But again, Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica, it just ain't it. You can give it a try. It came out on the PlayStation 2. I believe it worked with the Gun Con. But to me, that is bottom of the barrel trash. And we are going to throw it in to the F tier. And speaking of bottom of the barrel trash, in comes Resident Evil Gaiden, the next Resident Evil game that was released in December 14th, 2001. This game was released on the Game Boy Color, and if you remember back in the day, there was teasers and all this stuff of a Resident Evil OG release for the Game Boy, and it got scrapped, I believe, 80% through the game. Resident Evil Gaiden is strictly a Game Boy Color game. It was released only on the Game Boy Color, and I'm glad it stood only on the Game Boy Color. This game is another one of those games that are like scraping the bottom of the barrel of hot garbage. This game features Leon S. Kennedy and Barry Burton, and you're on a ship, you're trying to save someone, I forgot their name, it wasn't worth remembering. You fight like the same boss on repeat the entire game. It's just not it. I did like the idea of it being on a boat. The combat is a little weird. The combat looks like something straight out of a RPG, I would say, more than a Resident Evil game. But overall, the enemies all look the same. The game suffers from a lot of slowdown. There's nothing really special about it except that it's Barry and Leon, two people that actually don't meet, or at least don't meet that early in the game series. So we're gonna take Resident Evil Gaiden and we're gonna shove it in the F tier. But in comes one of the most precious gems to survival horror, though from what I remember, it did not get the love it deserved. Resident Evil 1 Remake, which released in March 22nd, 2002. This was a remake of the original Resident Evil. I would say it just took a more serious tone, but it pretty much kept everything from the original and added on into it, adding a character like Lisa Trevor, gives you her backstory and all the things and all the experiments and everything. She gives you a bit of a Nemesis vibe because she's randomly in certain areas during the gameplay. Very, very, very good game this one is. Usually if people don't like the silly cheesiness of the original, I usually tell them, play Resident Evil 1 Remake, the original remake. You'll probably find a love for it and the Resident Evil series just from playing this one game. And with that, I will say, while it is pretty much like the original, just with more stuff added on, there were certain areas in the game that I personally felt didn't need to be extended, and by it being extended, it kind of ruined those sections for me. Besides that, I also feel like while it's an amazing remake, when I compare it to Resident Evil 1 original, it's like Resident Evil from the original to me had to have its cheesiness, its funny lines that kind of added to the game overall. You know, you're going through this special like mansion, the Spencer mansion, and you got zombies and hunters and dogs, and that comedic relief kind of helped you ease into like, oh, you know what, maybe I'm safe, until you realize that you're not safe. With Resident Evil 1 Remake, that wasn't really there. All the lines were changed, so when you hear certain lines like the amazing you were almost a Jill sandwich, that line is completely changed and it doesn't have the same feel as the original. But Nonetheless, Resident Evil 1 Remake will get tossed into the S tier with the original. While I still feel the original has more charm to me than the remake is an amazing game, and I consider them both separate from each other. Now, here's a game many seem to dislike and some love. I feel like if you hate it, you hate it. If you love it, you love it. There is really no middle ground with this game. And it's actually a game I remember seeing growing up. Watched my brother play it late nights when I wasn't supposed to. And that would be Resident Evil 0. This game was released after Resident Evil 1 Remake, but I felt that the controls were a lot more clunky, or it always felt like you faced such a delay. The zombies, when they go for grabs, had extra time in their animations, so even if you dodge the grab, if you try to go right beside them almost immediately after, it will still count as you got grabbed. There was a lot of things about it that I didn't understand why they went backwards instead of forward like they did with Remake. And yeah, Resident Evil 0 is just one of those games. I'd play it here and there just for a challenge, or maybe for a marathon on twitch.tv/crazygamingdays. Gotta enter the plug there. But yeah, it's one of those games you'll rarely see me play, and if you do see me play it, I'm probably doing knife only, and probably regretting it all at the same time. While the game features the early on co-op system of having two characters being played at the same time, I feel like it would have been better if you only played one character throughout the entire game instead of two characters at the same time. And yes, you'll say, oh, crazy, you don't have to. You can always go with one. And I will tell you, no. If you want to be optimal with Resident Evil 0, you need to learn and master controlling both characters and knowing when to leave one in a certain area so you can carry on with the other character and give yourself some sort of advantage. With that being said though, Resident Evil 0 to me is definitely a D tier. Many might not agree with that, but that's just what I feel. It's a game I will rarely play. I don't enjoy it much. If I play it again, it will be knife only. Nothing special. Now you probably thought, are we done with the Resident Evil Survivor games? And I would tell you, no, we're not done with the Resident Evil Survivor games. This next entry is Resident Evil Dead Aim, also known as Resident Evil /Biohazard Gun Survivor 4. Now you're probably thinking, what the hell happened to Gun Survivor 3? Dino Crisis took it. If you look it up, it's called Dino Stalker, I think. But it's also known as Gun Survivor 3. I don't know why they did it. Whatever. Doesn't matter. We're on Resident Evil Dead Aim. Now, Resident Evil Dead Aim. This brings me back to the days again in the States. KB Toys, if you remember that store. I had one that was closing down. And we went there. They had Resident Evil Dead Aim sealed in the box with the GunCon 2, which was the it was the GunCon for the PlayStation 2. And it came together. And because the store was closing, they were selling the game for only $30. And mind you, this game released, I believe it was on release or maybe a month or two after its release. So we picked it up. We went back home. We turned it on. And out of the Gun Survivor games, or a lot of the spin-off games, I actually treasure Resident Evil Dead Aim. You play as a character named Bruce McGivern, I think, or some garbage. He's just Bruce. Or you could just call him Rip-Off Leon, because I always felt like this game was just a test. But in this game, it's another one where you're on a ship. Of course, you're on a ship. But I feel like this game actually worked out. It did have a bit of a struggle, from what I know in terms of scores, but it is a cross between a normal Resident Evil game and a light gun shooter. with the GunCon 2 for the PlayStation 2, there was actually a D-pad in the back of the gun, so you can move your character forward, back, left, and right. I believe if you aimed off screen and held the trigger down, that would allow you to run in the game, and then you just use the D-pad for movement. Besides that, if you aim at the screen, and I believe you had to hit the trigger while aiming at your screen, that will enter you into a first-person mode where you can move your cursor, or if you turn your cursor off, you will just be aiming your gun and going to town on enemies. You will be smoking enemies left and right, taking down bosses. This to me was a really, really fun experience, and I actually still play it to this day. It's a game I wish I can find, or I can actually purchase in its original form, in its original box with the GunCon. But yeah, this spin-off was actually a good one to me. Again, not many people like the spin-offs. They'll always go with, oh, where's the classic Resident Evil? Where's the classic Resident Evil? And I'm just here like, hey, I'm just gonna enjoy what I enjoy. And that's about it. So with Resident Evil Dead Aim, we're actually going to put it in the A tier next to Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And speaking of spin-offs, Resident Evil Outbreak File 1. What a game. I still remember reading GamePro and seeing this, and it's like, oh my god, it's Resident Evil, it's online, it's on the PS2. I could play with people. I can play Resident Evil with other people online, and we're just playing survivors. And that's Resident Evil Outbreak. It's an amazing game, a very notable entry in the Resident Evil franchise. Believe this is the first online / multiplayer co-op game for Resident Evil, and it was phenomenal. It is so good. You could play one of many characters, team up online, or at least back in the day, you were able to team up online, and you're playing through just different areas of Raccoon City. And I gotta say, even by myself, I still sometimes play this in marathons. This game, even by yourself, is still a blast. It's such a challenge. The AI can play the other characters. Sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not so good. But, you know, back in the day on the PS2, if you played it with people, it's always very interesting because sometimes you get screwed over and you'll die, or you'll get bit and infected and turn into a zombie, I believe, and you were able to attack other players and all this crazy stuff. Very, very good. And Capcom, if you're listening, if you're watching, please give us a Resident Evil Outbreak remake. You make all these other multiplayer games, you know, like other ones that are gonna pop up on this list, and I'm just gonna skip it because it's garbage. But come on, you have the recipe right there. You got the moneymaker. Release an Outbreak remake, or at least a remaster of Resident Evil Outbreak on console and PC, so that we can all play together without having to do some weird thing of going to a private server or something. Just make it happen. But Resident Evil Outbreak for me is actually going into the S+ tier. Another amazing game, like I said, and the first of its kind for Resident Evil. Still a gem, still fun to play, and you know, if you find a way to play with people online, you know, in certain ways, try it. You'll most likely have a blast. Now moving on to File 2 of Resident Evil Outbreak. This was released, I believe, a year after Resident Evil Outbreak, and to me, I'm not a fan. Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 just had great stages, great enemies, and everything felt amazing. Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, on the other hand, to me, just didn't meet my expectations. I was looking for a better experience, an experience grown from the original. Instead, I felt like I got the original game with added enemies and areas, but the areas were just not good. I feel like a lot of the areas in File 2 were not fun, they were not good, and usually I got bored and I would just turn it off. So for that, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 will be entering the F tier, along with Gaiden and Gun Survivor 2. Well, look at what we have here. Looks like the next game release was Resident Evil 4, released on the 11th of January 2005. Now, this was a game where I was still not old enough to buy it on my own, but a little bit of convincing, and I was able to get this game, actually, I believe, a couple of days before release. Resident Evil 4 was and still is an amazing title. I wouldn't say perfect, but probably pretty close. This game follows Leon S. Kennedy once again, and this is supposed to be the story for Leon after Resident Evil 2. Great game, great story. The characters were very, very well thought out, except for one character in particular, and she would be Ashley Graham. This character gets very annoying very fast, and it was a character that even growing up and even to this day, still her voice drills a hole into my head and I just get a headache. But the game is still great. It's such a fun game, still fun to this day. In my opinion, if you want to play Resident Evil 4 and you have a Wii or access to a Wii, nunchucks and a Wiimote, Resident Evil 4 with the Wii edition with the nunchuck and Wiimote support is, in my opinion, one of the best versions of the game if we're talking about like strictly vanilla. Now, if you want a more beefed up version, a more HD version of Resident Evil 4 Original, I would recommend playing it on PC. There's an HD project for Resident Evil 4 which upscales all of the textures. It looks amazing. If you thought the version that was released on PS3, PS4, Xbox 360 and all of that looked better than the original of it, this on PC looks amazing. And at the same time, the controls are actually fixed for PC, so you can control Leon a lot better than the original vanilla controls. But Resident Evil 4 Original will enter into the S+ tier. Amazing, amazing game. Still one that I enjoy to play here and there. But while we are on the topic of Resident Evil 4 Original, let's take a step into the Resident Evil 4 VR. Pretty much the same game, except they changed certain lines. Some people didn't like the changes. The changes didn't really bother me. I really didn't care about the dialogue. One thing about Resident Evil 4 in VR was just how badass you felt. Wielding your gun, wielding your knife, and just running and slashing and doing all this crazy stuff. You felt like it was you. You finally felt like you were Leon S. Kennedy and you went into that village and you were going to save Ashley. The VR version is really, really fun, and I wish the VR version came out on Steam on Steam. But if you have an Oculus Quest, you should pick it up. It is really fun. Like I said, it's pretty much the original game. You just feel more in control, and some lines were changed, but it's not that serious. It will enter S+ along with the original. And while we were on the topic of Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, we take a step into another railgun shooter, Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles. This game was released on the 13th of November 2007 on the Nintendo Wii. And when I say I loved it, I loved it. Pretty much you take the idea of House of the Dead, you take Resident Evil, you put it together, and somehow you make one incredible game. Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles follows a couple of chapters of Resident Evil. Can't remember all of it from the top of my head, but I know it starts off, I believe, with Resident Evil 0. Honestly, I would rather play Umbrella Chronicles if I wanted to play Resident Evil 0. It does a better job. It feels more fun. But at the same time, not many people enjoy rail shooters, and I can understand that. Maybe you think Resident Evil shouldn't be a rail shooter, but if you're open-minded, I highly recommend trying out the Umbrella Chronicles. It's really good. You also get some bonus content like some Rebecca chapters that tells you what was happening from 0 into Resident Evil 1. Some Wesker chapters as well that tells you more of his story and what happens. Very, very good. We're gonna throw Umbrella Chronicles into the S tier. Well, we've now made it to the next game that introduced co-op online, and this would be Resident Evil 5, released on the 5th of March 2009. Resident Evil 5 took the world by storm. You play as Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar, I believe her name is. And this game was also done co-op online. You can play one or the other, depending if you were playing new game, you would start as Chris. If someone joins your game, they're Sheva. Opposite way around if you join someone else's game. But this game, to me, kind of was good, but in some ways kind of was not. If you played it solo, you know the AI was not good. It was more frustrating and infuriating, and you usually would get teared down and you wouldn't really want to play it more. Resident Evil 5, in my opinion, is best played with someone else. Whether it's a stranger or a great friend of yours, if you both play Resident Evil 5 together, you are bound to have an amazing time. The last time I played it, I actually played it with someone I knew. And guess what? It was hilarious and fun. But still, Resident Evil 5 has its issues. Things that I still don't enjoy so much with it, including the AI. Resident Evil 5 will be getting thrown into the B tier. And now we take a step back to the rail shooters. Resident Evil: The Dark Side Chronicles, released on the 17th of November 2009, bit after Resident Evil 5 if I remember correct. But this was another rail shooter like Umbrella Chronicles on the Nintendo Wii. This one just takes place, of course, with the rest of the story. It's the story of Resident Evil 2, so you got Leon and Claire. It gives the story of Code Veronica, so you have Claire, Chris, and Steve. It also has a chapter called Operation Javier, which is pretty much the story before Resident Evil 4. It tells the tale of Leon on a mission with Jack Krauser. If you played Resident Evil 4, you know who Jack Krauser is. This tells the early stages before he actually becomes infected. I highly recommend playing Darkside Chronicles. I believe it's on the PlayStation Network store. You could play it on the Wii. Really, really fun. If you like rail shooters like The House of the Dead, highly recommend it. This one will also enter in, I would say we'll throw it into S. Now comes a game that not many people know about. Resident Evil: The Mercenaries 3D. This game was on the Nintendo 3DS. Yeah, you know, with the weird little 3D they tried to do that didn't really work, but you played the games anyways. Resident Evil: The Mercenaries 3D was pretty much a game strictly based off the side mini game of Mercenaries from the other Resident Evil games. But I actually enjoyed this game so much. There were so many characters, there were so many costumes, you had so many stages. It was a blast. I believe you were able to play it online with someone through the 3DS. I played it by myself, and every time I booted it up, it was just so much fun. In my opinion, one of my favorite Mercenaries was Resident Evil 5, and that's pretty much what that is. It's just cranked up, so much fun, and if you didn't have a chance to play it, I honestly would say find a way to give it a shot if you really love Mercenaries. This is a game I wish they would have ported off of the 3DS like they did with Revelations, but sadly it is lost there. We're gonna take Mercenaries 3D and we will put it in the B tier. So here I'm gonna take some time and I'm going to also talk about Resident Evil Deadly Silence. This is Resident Evil DS. This was also released on the original DS, I believe that's what it was from, and it's pretty much Resident Evil 1, just even better. In my opinion, it's the perfect version of Resident Evil 1 OG. You get a special mode called Rebirth Mode, which lets you use some of the things like the microphone and things like that for the DS in the game. A lot of things change. There's like puzzle boxes. It is definitely worth playing if you've never touched it before. Besides that, it also still comes with the original game itself, slightly altered, but it also is the only version of Resident Evil 1 original that not only has door skip, but it has cutscene skip, making a speedrun of this game take maybe roughly 25 minutes, I believe it is. It did everything that we would ever want. If only this game was ported outside of the DS. But even still, amazing. This version goes into the S+. Now I would like to take a second to just talk about some of the games that I'm just gonna blow past because I really have no care for them, and yeah, they're nothing special. We're gonna start with Resident Evil Reverse. This game, horrible. I don't even know what they were thinking. They made another game where it's like a death match, but it wasn't good. Clunky controls, animations were terrible. This game itself felt kind of like a cash grab, and it hurt. It definitely hurt. While it was free, it felt like it took money from me because of how horrible it actually is. To this day, I believe only 3 people really play it on Steam. Check it for yourself. No one cares about this game. We could have gotten Outbreak remake or something, but no. Reverse is what we got, and Reverse goes into the F tier. Moving from there, we're gonna jump into another one, Resident Evil Umbrella Corps. Umbrella Corps, another horrible game. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm just gonna tell you how it is. Do not play this game. Every mission pretty much feels exactly the same. There's only like 3 objectives, and you'll be doing those same 3 objectives for 20 plus missions. I've done it. It took me more than 8 hours, and I hated every single second. Horrible controls, horrible design, horrible enemy AI. Everything was horrible. It also joins the F tier. To keep pushing through some of these games that I really don't have a care for, we're gonna go with Resident Evil 6. I'm not gonna say anything on it. They tried so hard to give every fan a campaign that will fit what they wanted, and all of it was mediocre. It's going into the F tier. Now comes Resident Evil Resistance. If you know Resident Evil Resistance, it was paired with Resident Evil 3 Remake. In my opinion, it felt like it was supposed to be just its own game, but when they heard the backlash from people saying they didn't care about it or they didn't want that game, it seems like they thought, hey, let's just finish Resident Evil 3, release it with Resident Evil Resistance, and sell it to them that way so people buy it. And we did. Sadly, it ended up feeling like Resistance was supposed to be the main game, and Resident Evil 3 Remake just fell short in many ways. I still consider Resident Evil 3 Remake to be an alright game on its own. As a remake, it is not special, it is not good. It's the worst remake for them, and I'm going to take care of both of these pretty much at the same time. Resistance still has or had a lot of charm. When it released, I actually found it to be a lot of fun. The downfall of it was all of the hackers that played the game on PC. Pretty much you will start a map, and once you exit the first room, there's nothing but the highest tier enemies all through all the areas, and you would normally know that is impossible. You can't spawn that much, but no, this happened and it ruined the experience. Besides that, it was a really fun game while it lasted. I'm gonna put Resistance into the A tier, and Resident Evil 3 Remake will go into the C tier. Speaking of C tier, I might as well talk about this game now. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Another one of those multiplayer online games where you thought it was going to be special, and it was, in a really bad way. But Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City pretty much takes place during Resident Evil 2 and 3. So you're going through the you're going through like multiple sections of Raccoon City and all of this stuff. It could have been amazing, but sadly it fell short. And it fell short hard. Enemy AI was too incredible. Enemies never really missed, especially the humans who actually shot guns. It felt like they never missed. No matter how much you're moving, they were tracing you. Your aiming was always off. The reticle never lined up with your shots. This one just wasn't it. I have a soft spot for how bad it is, but that's a once in a while type of thing. And as a once in a while type of thing, you know what? I was going to put it in C. It's going with Resident Evil 0 and D. And it looks like we have only 6 more games to go. So let's kick it up a notch. Resident Evil Revelations was released on the 3DS. Yes, you heard me correct. Another Resident Evil 3DS exclusive. It wasn't that exclusive for very long, but it was ported to consoles and PC, and I played it. The first time I played it, I thought it was actually pretty solid. You played Jill Valentine and her missions to do all of this wacky stuff again on a boat. And I felt like the boat was really nice. The enemies were interesting. But in some ways, this game also felt kind of weird. It felt like it would only mainly play well on a 3DS and not really ported anywhere else. But I did play it a couple of months ago again, and I found a newfound love for Revelations. It actually played really well. For the most part, it was tank control-ish, I believe, but there was, of course, certain areas, like when you play Chris Redfield in like this snowy area, parts like that don't feel anything special, but usually when you played as Jill, you had the most fun, and because of that, I'm actually gonna throw this into the A tier. Following it, we'll talk about Resident Evil Revelations 2. Resident Evil Revelations 2, to me, was the much better version of Revelations. You could play Claire Redfield or paired with Barry's daughter Moira, and you also played Barry Burton paired up with a character, I think her name was Natalia, and she has like the psychic power. Moira is just Barry's daughter, scared of using guns, uses a crowbar. I don't know, but the game played really well. In my opinion, I enjoyed playing Claire and Moira more than Barry, because Barry just felt like a babysitter for most of the game. But the game still was really, really fun, and I can still play it to this day and have a blast. Resident Evil Revelations 2 goes into the S tier. And now, after Resident Evil 6, we thought, wow, where is the next Resident Evil game? Will Resident Evil ever come back after this atrocious game called Resident Evil 6? And guess what? Yes, Resident Evil / Biohazard, also known as Resident Evil 7, was a return to the classic survival horror ways, except this time it was done in first person. Many people like the third person or the over the shoulder or the fixed cameras of the older games, but Resident Evil 7 did Resident Evil very well, in my opinion. Had great enemies. The story was actually captivating. You kind of got drawn into the story, and though the main character Ethan was nothing to write home about, it was kind of like this blank slate where you can make it seem as if you were that character. It made you feel like you were experiencing all of this. And with that, honestly, it was, again, the return to Resident Evil's glory days, and I will throw that into the S tier. Following the success of Resident Evil 7, now comes our next remake. Or another one of the remakes, since we already talked about trash Resident Evil 3. But Resident Evil 2 remake, and all I can say is play it. Play it, play it, play it. It is amazing. While there's some things that are a little off from the original, such as the scenarios of A and B not really being true scenarios that are different from each other, I would say Resident Evil 2 remake is the better version to play if you want a more modern take. Resident Evil 2 remake goes into S+. Following that will be Resident Evil Village. Resident Evil Village is also known as Resident Evil 8, the next part of Ethan's, or next part and the last part of Ethan's story for that whole winter saga, or whatever you want to call it. And Village, while it's a good game, after the first time you play it, it kind of gets stale really fast. The best parts of the game are too short, and the parts that you would hate the most end up being the longest parts. And because of that, it will be entering the B tier. And on to the final one, the latest entry to Resident Evil, the Resident Evil 4 remake. And I'm just gonna say this before I head on off. Thank you so much for watching this video. For those of you who stuck all the way through, I do appreciate you so much. If you want to see some more content from me, you can find me on Twitch. There's a ton of stuff that I do, lots of challenges, lots of Resident Evil, lots of games in general. Or you can check out the rest of my shorts and videos here on YouTube. Now, with all of that said, I will tell you this. Resident Evil 4 remake is definitely worth a purchase. The DLC as well, the DLC of Separate Ways for Resident Evil 4 remake is amazing. In my opinion, I enjoyed the DLC more than the main game, but I enjoyed the main game more than the original. So when you think about it that way, it is definitely worth the purchase. I would purchase it again if I had to. It is just so fun, a great take of an amazing game, and I'm glad we received it. Give it a shot. Resident Evil 4 remake enters my last game in the S+ tier. Thank you so much for watching. You are all amazing. Thank you for giving me your time. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any feedback, let me know in the comments. Just don't be a bozo. We don't like bozos around here. And until next time, I will be working on a couple of other videos, and I hope you will like and subscribe and check them out when they release. But this is me, Crazy Gaming Days, signing out. Thank you for checking out my tier list, and I hope you have a great day.